considerations. So I've already talked about, let's all stay muted and our videos off just to kind of improve the bandwidth. But then we'll have, times where we can turn them on and have discussions. And if you have questions, again, put it down in the chat box and I'll check that after each slide. Let's try to use, during the discussions, let's try to use, respectful language as much as possible. Avoid shaming, things like that. Let's focus on behaviors and systems and not people, just because it's much more effective that way. And we'll talk a lot more about that. Let's be mindful. White fragility, white discomfort, these are some of the reasons why it's so hard for white people to kind of understand the true nature of a lot of this racism and white privilege. A lot of times we're going to talk about things and you're going to have reactions and you're going to have, feel some discomfort. Be mindful of that. That's the first step of really understanding the internalizations that you have. It's just understanding when, if you get a reaction when someone's talking about police brutality, or you want to say the same thing, that's important. Just being mindful of that is a huge first step. And then from there, you're able to, over time, can kind of process what's behind that and how that was absorbed. So just being mindful of that. And also, a lot of times, let's hold space for multiple narratives. A lot of times, we fight about, which narrative is right, when in reality, everyone's narrative is right and is part of the, bigger equation. I have never experienced police brutality, but I have Black friends who have experienced horrific brutality. So I could either say my Black friends experienced this, but I've never experienced it, which kind of negates what they're saying. Or I can say my Black friends have experienced police brutality and I have never experienced it, which is part of a bigger, that's telling the bigger story of racism and white privilege. So we have to understand all these narratives are important. So let's not try to argue against people's experiences. Let's just make room to, for everyone. And the last part, so we are going to have discussions and things, but one of the biggest, my hope is to have a clear, recording that I can send to everybody. So I want, so if there are, we're having discussions and they, and they're going to, take up more time than we have, or if it's going in a bad direction, or I may table a lot of these discussions, until we take a break, or until, the end of class, or until we on our fourth, Wednesday of the month, we're going to have group discussions and activities and things. So we may table that for, so we can have a bigger, more intentional conversation around that. So I just give me a heads up. I may table conversations, and even sometimes, a lot of anti-racism work, they're starting to segregate these, with white groups and Black groups, because a lot of times white people, in order to process our internalizations, we got to bring up a lot of bad things that can, traumatize non-white people. So we need to. So a lot of times too, I may, table that and then talk to you one-on-one, or figure out better ways to kind of do that. So, so just giving a heads up on that. And then, so a lot of these presentations there's an enormous amount. Most of my presentations, it's not so much that I'm trying to tell you all new information. I'm trying to kind of promote all the great resources and information and things that are happening right now. There's so we're going to watch lots of videos, or read a lot of memes, a lot of social media memes and quotes. We're going to read some book quotes and things like that. And it's really important, with this stuff, I want to be very intentional with this material, because all this material belongs to people, so I want to be very intentional about this. One is I never want to, I don't ever plan on making a profit off of anyone's, content that they created off of this course. I'm not going to use this course to kind of get, better position for it or anything like that. I want to respect that. I never want to misrepresent this intent. I'm not going to post a video so we can tear it apart. I want all the resources that we're going to share. They're made to be shared. They're pulled from YouTube. They're pulled from social media. They're pulled from books that are meant to be shared and to educate people. So I'm gonna do my best to not misrepresent what that media is. And then if anyone ever has a problem, any person that owns some of this media has a problem, without questions, I'll remove that media and I'll re-record anything that covers that. So, and I'm asking everyone to do the same. I want a great part about this course is want you all to share these, these resources and this content and these videos and things with yourselves, your families and friends. But if anyone's going to put a book together and make a bunch of money, you got to get permission. Like you can't. Yeah, this is not our own. The people own this content, so just want to give that heads up and ask everyone to respect that. And at the same time, a lot of these it's so important to have content creators. Have these people that can create this content, this amazing anti-racism and social justice content. This is the kind of stuff that moves people, that changes our country, and like it's so important to have these people. At the same time, these people most of them are not getting paid. Most of them are dealing with enormous amount of emotional labor creating this content, especially these awesome quotes that we share. A lot of times, the people who create this stuff have to deal with an endless amount of racist comments and just crap thrown at them for making this stuff. So if you feel like, this is a free course, but if you feel like there's monetary value in it, or you feel like these quotes in these videos have value to it, go to these people's, pages and donate to them, especially monthly donors. And monthly donors are what makes change happens. One-time donors are great, but monthly donors are fantastic. Or buy their books, or sign up for, their workshops and things like that. Usually if you go to their Instagram or Twitter, you can find, always mispronounce it, Patreon page, and then you can actually, you could donate to them directly or things like that. So definitely, if you're looking for ways to to use your money for good, affect change, this is a great one, because there's just so much great content out there. All right, I want to start out this class with what we call a native land acknowledgement, and this is something that's you might have already heard before. You might have heard people start their public meetings or workshops or events with. Hopefully, we'll be hearing a lot more of this. There's been a push, particularly by the U.S. Department of Art and Culture, who just created what's called Honor Native Land, a guide and call to acknowledgement. They've made a guide to kind of help with native land acknowledgement. But this is important because we have to understand, we're going to be talking about a lot of big systems today, about white supremacy and things like that. And a lot of that, the roots of all that, really go back to colonialism. Really go back to kind of Europe in the 1500s, with feudalism and the rise of capitalism, which was we're going to have a whole class on kind of mapping that whole history out. But a lot of capitalism was people were revolting against feudalism, but a lot of capitalism was kind of that counter-revolution that was created the system on making a lot of wealth from exploiting labor and land, which is not the first system to do that, but it's a very efficient system, especially paired with a lot of the feudal systems at the time that were happening. And when they reached their limits, they started, opening up and creating what we call colonialism. They start exporting these feudalism and capitalism systems in plantation, form of plantation, systems, slave systems, things like that. They started exporting this, all over the world to make an enormous amount of wealth through just some brutal means, genocide, ethnic cleansing, enslavement, things like that. But at the time, they couldn't just say they're doing that. They couldn't just say they're making a lot of wealth off of killing people, enslaving people. So instead, they created race and racism, and this idea that a lot of anti-Black and anti-Indigenous practices and systems, basically claiming that Black people or Africans were all one Black species, and they were they're inferior, they're different species than white people, they're uncivilized, dangerous, all that stuff. So enslavement actually brought them civilization, and was actually benefited them, and same with Native cultures, that they're uncivilized, they're beasts, different, and that or European colonialism actually brought in civilization. In reality, is both of these societies, Black, Africa and indigenous populations and everywhere, we're civilizations, we're civilized, but the European people actually slaughtered them and destroyed their cultures and enslaved them for a lot of wealth. But even though a lot of countries have gotten past a lot of the, they overthrew, Europe colonialism, or independence, things like that. But the reality is, the colonial systems, the anti-black and anti-indigenous colonial systems that were set up everywhere in the world are still, were never really dealt with. We're never dismantled. So that same anti-indigenous and same anti-blackness is still permeating in all of our systems today. So when we talk about decolonization, we're going to be talking about a lot of that, throughout this course, how to decolonize. We're really talking about how to dismantle a lot of these leftover colonial systems that we're dealing with. And a big one is a big colonial system that we need to dismantle is the erasure of indigenous and native history and culture from the land that we all now walk on. And so you think about it, like majority of people, I know the history of this country, I know its history of colonialism, but to be honest, and when I was creating this slide, I had to actually research, who were the native people that I've been in DC for 15 years, and I had to research who originally lived in this land. And a really great website to research is Native Land. If you want, it outlines, who's in the area, what tribes, and you can do a lot of great research. But so the idea of native land acknowledgement is to kind of is a form of decolonization where we're actually bringing back the history and culture of the native people before us, which many of them are still with us, but we're occupying the land. So the idea is we're trying to bring back our history, so we can better understand how to actually move forward. I'm going to read this. I'm just going to read this little highlight of this great quote that says, "Acknowledgement is a simple and powerful way of showing respect and a step towards correcting the stories and practices that erase indigenous people's history and culture, and toward inviting and honoring the truth." So I did some research the native tribes in the DC area, and there's a lot of different tribes in this area, but the main one was the Anacostan people, and they were part of the Piscataway tribe or nation, which is a larger nation in the mid-Atlantic that encompassed a lot of different smaller individual tribes. And they're eventually, the Anacostans were violently pushed out, enslaved, killed. Disease took a lot of them, and then the remainders of the people kind of left the Anacostan culture and were just kind of merged into other different tribes. But the official, the Piscataway, nation came out. The official aligned DC Native Land Acknowledgement is we acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the traditional land and Anacostan people of the Piscataway tribe. So that's really all we need to do with the native land is just acknowledging that. And if you want to give a little bit more history too, I think that's powerful. But I really like this great food justice advocate, LaDonna Redmond, wrote, "We must understand that the land that we stand on because someone else's blood is on it." And I think that's just it's so important not just to understand it and honor, that our history is good and bad, but also to understand, how we're going to move forward. What do we need to make this a better society for everyone. So we did a sound check, and it seemed to be working with everyone on the sound. But if not, just text me in the text box, and we'll try some things out. And we'll see.
Before I begin this morning, I'd like to recognize the Algonquin Nation, on whose traditional territory we are gathering. We acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land.
Wherever I go on God's green earth, I do the Lakota tradition of acknowledging four directions, the land, and the people living there. Uchimaka, as I call Grandmother Earth, the land, I view her as a sacred, living entity, and that's the way we acknowledge it in Lakota thought and philosophy.
As a Native person, I'm ready for any kind of confrontation that might come up, or I'm preparing myself to remind people of all those things that they forget about. I was at a meeting in Minneapolis, and the room was primarily non-Native people. I was in a non-Native organization, but this executive director got up and said, "Okay, we're gonna get started." So everybody, was sitting down and getting quiet. And she said, "I'd like to get started by acknowledging the indigenous culture of Minnesota." And I was like, first, I was like, whoa. And it just made everything like fall away a little bit from me. My guard went down. I was more relaxed because by saying that, like, that means she understands something that is just like you can't talk about, right? It just relaxed me as a minority, as a woman, and as a Native person. Like it just like pulled away this layer that's always there. It was super cool.
We're at a time where non-native cultures are understanding the traditions of indigenous peoples for probably the first time in our histories. So like when I go to New Zealand, the protocol is to acknowledge each other's ancestors and your mountains and your rivers. And that's such a beautiful tradition. When people are in that space and say, we acknowledge who you are, this land, where your people come from, they're saying we acknowledge a relationship, but we're also creating that relationship. This is a good thing.
The important thing would be that folks would then sit with that. Like, what does it mean that our settlement is occupying this space? And what responsibility do I have considering that legacy to these contemporary things, right? And how do I stop distancing myself from that? Ideally, that would be, for me, the impact that this has.
If you start acknowledging that the land that you're standing on and the space that you are in belong to people that are still here, like, make so much more room for understanding of all these other issues. It's one of those little things that, like, if it could just tip a little bit, all the like dominoes that could fall from it, I think are important.
I'm like imagining it and like wanting to live in that, like the thing that I'm imagining, like, yeah, that's actually really beautiful.
It's just being a genuine human being, to acknowledge each other's histories, the good and the bad.
Right. In the next context, I kind of want to talk a little bit about how this class kind of fits to. Is just talk a little bit about just what's been happening in the last couple of weeks, and I mean, we're, at this point, the international uprisings against police brutality and white supremacy. They're just I think it's important we understand that we need to stay laser focused on on campaigns like defunding the police and investing into these communities, but also we need to realize that we need to realize that this is part of something bigger. I was talking about, I mean, the colonialism. I was reading about in Australia, they're having these huge Black Lives Matter movements and marches, and I'm sure they care about George Floyd, but they're not necessarily marching particularly for George Floyd, but they're marching for the same things. The indigenous population, the Aboriginal population is a minority, a small part of the population in Australia, but but they are the majority of the people that experience police brutality. So that is because of that anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism that's just been exported everywhere and been ingrained in our system. So we need to understand that this is bigger than how big this is and how it fits into our history. So I want to read two quick quotes that I felt like did a really good job capturing that. One was from Ta-Nehisi Coates from this book, Between the World and Me, which is a fantastic book if you haven't had a chance to read it. But the truth is that the police reflect America in all of its will and fear. And whatever we might make of this country's criminal justice policy, it cannot be said that it was imposed by a repressive minority. The abuses that have followed from these policies, the sprawling carceral state, that random detention of Black people, the torture of suspects, are a product of the democratic will. And so to challenge the police is to challenge the American people who send them to the ghettos armed with the same self-generated fears that compel the people who think that they are white to flee the cities. And the second one I want to read, this is more, this one came out very recently from Jon Stewart. I think it was an interview with Rolling Stones, I believe. But he said, the police are a reflection of a society. They're not a rogue alien organization that came down to torment the Black community. They're enforcing segregation. Segregation is legally over, but it never ended. The police are in some respects a border troll, and they patrol the border between two Americas. So I really want, I really like these two quotes just to kind of frame like what, what it is, that's happening. It's not just these localized, a lot of people, I hear the words knee-jerk reaction. This is a knee-jerk reaction. This is not a knee-jerk reaction. I mean, this is something that people have been fighting against for centuries. So I have this another really great video. I don't know if anyone's seen that Trevor Noah when he gave his speech about the social contract, and it's actually a long video. I edited some of it. I try to keep most of the videos down to at least a couple minutes to 5 minutes, but I think this one is 7 minutes. But I'm going to play this really quickly, and then we'll have a little time to kind of discuss.
I think Amy Cooper was one of the first moments that one of the first dominoes that we saw get knocked down post-corona for many people. And that was a world where you quickly realize that while everyone is facing the battle against coronavirus, Black people in America are still facing the battle against racism and coronavirus. And the reason I say it's a domino is because think about how many Black Americans just have read and seen the news of how Black people are disproportionately affected by coronavirus, and not because of something inherently inside Black people, but rather because of the lives Black people have lived in America for so long. Coronavirus exposed all of it. And now here you had this woman who, we've all seen the video now, blatantly knew how to use the power of her whiteness to threaten the life of another man and his Blackness.
Oh, real quick, and so Amy Cooper, if you remember, she was the one that was in Central Park, New York, and there was a Black man who was a birder who asked her to put her dog on a leash, which was the law, and then she kind of blew up on him, and he got on video the fact that she was saying that she's going to call the police and tell him a Black man is threatening my life, and so just to give you a little context, sorry, I forgot to give it.
What we saw with her was a really, really powerful, explicit example of an understanding of racism in a structural way. When she looked at that man, when she looked at Cooper and she said to him, I'm going to call 911 and I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life. She knew how powerful that was. And that in itself is telling. It tells you how she perceives the police. It tells you how she perceives her perception or her relationship with the police as a white woman. It shows you how she perceives a Black man's relationship with the police and the police's relationship with him. It was powerful. Because so many people act like they don't know what Black Americans are talking about when they say it, and yet Amy Cooper had a distinct understanding. She was like, oh, I know that you're afraid of interacting with the police because there is a presumption of your guilt because of your Blackness. I know that as a white woman, I can weaponize this tool against you, and I know that by the time we've sifted through who was right or wrong, there's a good chance that you will have lost in some way, shape, or form. And then the video of George Floyd comes out, and I don't know what made that video more painful for people to watch. The fact that that man was having his life taken in front of our eyes, the fact that we're watching someone being murdered by someone whose job is to protect and serve, or the fact that he seemed so calm doing it, Oftentimes we always told that police feared for their life. It was like a threat. And you always feel like an asshole when you're like, you didn't fear for your life. Why did you fear for your life? How did you fear? But now more and more we're starting to see that it's like, no, it doesn't seem like there's a fear. It just seems like you can do it, so you did it. There was a Black man on the ground in handcuffs, and you could take his life, so you did, almost knowing that there would be no ramifications. Well, riots happened that for me was an interesting culmination of everything. I saw so many people online saying, these riots are disgusting. This is not how a society should be run. You do not loot and you do not burn and you do not, this is not how our society is built. And that actually triggered something in me where I was like, man, okay, society. But what is society? And fundamentally, when you boil it down, society is a contract. It's a contract that we sign as human beings amongst each other. We sign a contract with each other as people, whether it's spoken or unspoken, and we say, amongst this group of us, we agree in common rules, common ideals, and common practices that are going to define us as a group. That's what I think a society is. It's a contract. And as with most contracts, the contract is only as strong as the people who are abiding by it. But if you think of being a Black person in America who is living in Minneapolis or Minnesota or any place where you're not having a good time, ask yourself this question when you watch those people. What vested interest do they have in maintaining the contract? Why don't we all loot? Why doesn't everybody take? Because we've agreed on things. There are so many people who are starving out there. There's so many people who don't have. There are people who are destitute. There are people who, when the virus hits and they don't have a second paycheck, already broke, which is insane, but that's the reality. But still, think about how many people who don't have, the have-nots, say, you know what, I'm still going to play by the rules even though I have nothing, because I still wish for this society to work and exist. And then some members of that society, namely Black American people, watch time and time again how the contract that they have signed with society is not being honored by the society that has forced them to sign it with them. When you watch Ahmaud Arbery being shot and you hear that those men have been released, and were it not for the video and the outrage, those people would be living their lives, what part of the contract is that in society? When you see George Floyd on the ground and you see a man losing his life in a way that no person should ever have to lose their life, at the hands of someone who's supposed to enforce the law, what part of the contract is that? And a lot of people say, well, what good does this do? Yeah, but what good doesn't it do? That's the question people don't ask the other way around. What good does it do to loot Target? How does it help you to loot Target? Yeah, but how does it help you to not loot Target? Answer that question. Because the only reason you didn't loot Target before was because you were upholding society's contract. There is no contract if law and people in power don't uphold their end of it. George Floyd died. That is part of the reason the story became so big, is because he died. But how many George Floyds are there that don't die? How many men are having knees put on their necks? How many Sandra Blands are out there being tossed around? It doesn't make the news because it's not grim enough. It doesn't even get us enough anymore. It's only the deaths, the gruesome deaths that stick out. But imagine to yourself, if you grew up in a community where every day someone had their knee on your neck, where every day somebody was out there oppressing you every single day. You tell me what that does to you as a society, as a community, as a group of people. And when you know that this is happening because of the color of your skin, not because the people are saying it's happening because of the color of your skin, but rather because it's only happening to you and you're the only people who have that skin color. And so to anyone who watched that video, don't ask yourself if it's right or wrong to loot, or don't ask yourself, wow, what does looting help? No. Ask yourself that question. Ask yourself why it got you that much more watching these people loot, because they were destroying the contract that you thought they had signed with your society. And now think to yourself, imagine if you were them watching that contract being ripped up every single day. Ask yourself how you'd feel.
All right. So a couple comments that Regina said that Simon & Bolton has a book out about the history of Chicago police, 1820 and 1970. And the reason the police there in America was to protect capital and to enforce a racial hierarchy. They were not created to serve and protect. That was the deal that came later. And Erica writes that, she posted the link to the Anti-Racism Coalition in Washington, D.C. that she was talking about. Cool. Well, I'd love to. I mean, I kind of want. I played those quotes and I played that video mainly to kind of center us a little bit on what just what's been happening for the last month. But I want to kind of give it just a second to see if anyone, before we kind of move on and kind of jump a little bit more into the course, to see if anyone wants to kind of add to that, and you feel free. You can unmute yourself or type in your question or anything like that. And we'll give you a little couple seconds. Right. Well, we'll have lots more time to talk to as well. So I'm going to. So that kind of brings me to like where our course and how we're kind of. So this is the schedule to the course. And like I was saying before, we're doing thematic units. We're trying to keep things, relative as well. And we're going to be recording all these classes as well. And then I didn't list this, but at the end of each month, we'll have we're going to have a group discussion kind of time to kind of dive a little bit deeper and kind of process things a little bit more, because a lot of times this is a lot of information, and it helps. Yeah, we're going to try to incorporate some more intentional processing as well. All right, and so I've been mentioning the People's School of DC. So this course is a project of the People's School of DC, and this is a group of us got together to kind of create this website with two goals. One is there's just so much amazing social justice work and organizations and resources that are happening in DC, and there's so many people that are just not aware of all this like great work. So we on this page we've actually mapped out a lot of different organizations and resources. Like if you want to get involved with like immigration work, then we have a section of all the organizations, not all of them probably, but a lot of them that you can volunteer with, you can follow, you can donate to. If you want to work on racism, you want to work on police brutality, you want to work on homelessness, it's just a great way to kind of find out who's doing what. At the same time, we try to capture a lot of, like, we have a Facebook page where we capture a lot of different like workshops and lectures and activism and things. So if you want to figure out more ways to kind of get involved, and a lot of this content that is on this website. So if you like some of these memes or videos and things, you want to share them, you can find them on the website. But we're always looking for people to kind of help with, make it more accessible. There's a lot of information on the website. It's not very, it's not most accessible. So love people that kind of help. I love people. We want to try to make more mini lessons and shareable lessons and things like that. So definitely, if you have interest, let us know. And then one of the things, so this can be a lot, sometimes is when you're first diving into anti-racism work, and it could be overwhelming. And that's actually like, it could get to the point where you start shutting down and you start, avoiding things and stuff. So we actually created this as an anti-racism hierarchy where if you're just new to this and you're trying to figure out where you're at, a lot of times it gives you suggestions. Like if you're new to it, maybe like you just need to work on education, take some anti-racism courses, show up to meetings, don't talk, just like listen to these like, Black Lives Matter meetings and things, and Surge and things like places like that. Believe people's of color's experiences. But also, moving up, when you're ready, you can start participating more in rallies and organizing and fundraising and things like that. And then moving up even more, confronting people, confronting families and friends, taking bystander intervention classes, confronting harassment. And then on top is kind of like the dismantling, where we're actually building policies and working with anti-racist politicians and building community alternatives, policing and stuff like that. So it just kind of gives you these ideas to kind of meet yourself where you're at and then work your way up, when you can. All right, so this is the last video I'm going to play. So there's a lot of videos on this one. A lot of these classes, well, there's a lot of videos from all these classes, but this is probably the one that has the most videos. But I just wanted to kind of play a quick James Baldwin video, just to kind of set the, for me, it kind of sets the intentions of what we're trying to accomplish with this course. So I'm going to play it really quickly, and then I'll talk a little bit about it afterwards.
Comes as a great shock to discover that the country, which is your birthplace, and to which you owe your life and your identity, has not in its whole system of reality evolved any place for you. It comes as a great shock around the age of 5 or 6 or 7 to discover that the flag to which you have pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to discover that Gary Cooper killing off the Indians when you were rooting for Gary Cooper that the Indians were you. When I was growing up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history, and neither did I. That I was a savage, about whom the less said the better, who had been saved by Europe and brought to America. And of course, I believed it. I didn't have much choice. Those are the only books there were. I am stating very seriously, and this is not an overstatement. I picked the cotton, and I carried cloth, and I built the railroads under someone else's whip for nothing. For nothing. If one has got to prove one's title to the land, isn't 400 years enough? 400 years, at least 3 wars. The American soil is full of the corpses of my ancestors. Why is my freedom or my citizenship or my right to live there, how is it conceivably a question now? What we are not facing is the results of what we've done. What one begs the American people to do for all our sakes is simply to accept our history until the moment comes when we, the Americans, we, the American people, we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other. Until this moment, there is scarcely any hope for the American dream, because the people who are denied participation in it, by their very presence, will wreck it.
All right, and so I played this one to at the beginning to kind of set the intentions of the class. Well, one, I mean James Baldwin is just amazing. We're gonna listen a lot and read a lot about James Baldwin throughout the series. He does such a good job at just explaining like the anti-blackness, anti-black culture, and what it means to grow up into that and to realize that the flag is not here to serve you, that your heroes who you're rooting for were, killing you, and just summarize. It's just the idea of like the line, what one begs the American people to do for all of our six is to simply accept our history. And that, as a high school history teacher, a former high school history teacher, we do not teach our history. Like our curriculum is super whitewashed and super Eurocentric, and it's impossible to understand the current world that we live in with the history that we teach. And when he talks about like we need to understand this to build a new identity, I don't think we're not talking a post-racial identity, but we're talking our next class we're going to focus on whiteness. We need a new identity. We need to move beyond whiteness. Whiteness is not just a skin color. It's a legal status of privilege at the cost of blacks disenfranchisement and oppression. So building a new identity, a new decolonial identity, we need to understand our history so we can move on. And so that's kind of like the intention that I'm trying to set with this course, at least. Yeah, I'd love to see if there's anyone else that has any thoughts or comments on this before we dive into our first section. Yeah, because the breathtaking, powerful. I can't listen to this too many times. So much to unpack. Yeah, he's just. Yeah, James Baldwin is just a genius when it comes to describing what's happening in this country.